We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order.
New world order.
New world order.
This is a moment to seize. The kaleidoscope has been shaken. The pieces are in flux. Soon they will settle again. Before they do, let us reorder this world around us.
A new world order.
A world where the United Nations is poised to fulfill the historic vision of its founders.
Nevertheless, the United States is in a key position to shape this so that the problem of the Bush presidency will be the emergence of a new international order.
The first decade of the 21st century, that out of what will be seen as the greatest restructuring of the global economy, a new world order was created.
Documenting the crisis of our republic.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
Waging war on the New World Order.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
This is Govern America with Darren Weeks and Vicky Davis.
Live from FEMA Regions 5 and 10, this is Govern America. I'm Darren Weeks. Vicky Davis is here as well. It is the 18th of January, 2020, as we're fighting snowpocalypse here in southern Michigan. I guess from talking to Vicky here this morning, we have a good part of the nation that's fighting snowpocalypse. We got 4 to 7 inches here where I am located, and at least by the time it's all over, we're going to get another 1 to 2. Who knows? We're getting buried with all of this global warming. Hey, there's global warming everywhere. It's getting so hot that we're going to freeze our tails off. Good morning, Vicky.
Good morning.
How you doing?
It's unfortunate, I suppose we should all just pay money to Al Gore, and all this heat and warming will stop.
Weather will end if we pay money to Al Gore.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There you go.
And Greta Thunberg, or whatever her name is, the exploited teenager, the abused teenager that keeps, getting plastered everywhere. I don't mean plastered. I don't mean plastered.
So wrong to have that little.
To have, to
the global stage, because, I normally wouldn't say anything about children, but, if you put a child out there talking about adult subjects, she's going to get the adult response.
I think it's Chapter 35, if I remember correctly, of Agenda 21, Children and Youth in Sustainable Development. People don't realize this all comes from Agenda 21, Children and Youth in Sustainable Development, and they talk about how children have a unique perspective, and we need to hear from them. All of this stuff is being, and I come back to my earlier words that children have a unique perspective of ignorance because they haven't had any life experiences from which to draw to determine intelligent things to say about what's going on. But that's what they want. They want little brainwashed, mushy minds who are, who've been indoctrinated by universities and the education system, who have every reason to lie, to them about their futures. And by the time they're old enough to learn anything, if they ever do learn anything, many of them stay brainwashed, mind-controlled robots of the establishment because they don't know any better. But if any of them catch on, by that time it's pretty much too late because they've already forged their future.
Mm-hmm.
It's a sad state of affairs, really, Vicky.
Yeah, the whole world is a sad state of affairs. And why is that? It's because of the global governing system.
Yeah,
absolutely. I was looking at things today, and it came to me that with all of these international forums and international agreements, international law, look at our own Congress. What are they fighting about? Are they fighting about anything to do with the United States? No, they're fighting about Ukraine. They're fighting about money for Ukraine. Why are we giving money to Ukraine?
And there it is. That's exactly the point. What you just nailed on right there. This whole impeachment fiasco, which I don't even want to spend time on, because frankly, I don't really care if he's removed from office. He's already been impeached, but I don't care if he's been, I've spent a lot of time defending him because what he's been impeached for makes it's just stupid. It's stupid. I mean, we shouldn't be giving money to Ukraine in the first place, and not just Ukraine, but most of the other countries that we are giving any kind of aid to. I mean, USAID, the Agency for International Development, needs to be disbanded. And frankly, at this point, I would say the State Department needs to be disbanded. I mean, we need to be able to relate to foreign countries, but do we need a whole department to be able to do that?
Yeah. Well, I realized that the Helsinki Final Act was which created the Helsinki Conference, and what was negotiated during all of those conferences is basically a new law of regions. We had the law of nations, but what they've been working on in the Helsinki changed to an organization, which is an inter-parliamentary governmental organization. Mm-hmm. And they are redefining all the rules for countries that participate, and countries that participate become regions. Mm-hmm. So you could call it the law of regions.
Yeah.
And anything that they agree to at the global level gets translated into our domestic law.
Well, that's a perfect segue to going to the USMCA, which just passed this past week.
The Senate just finished its vote on the new North American Free Trade Agreement, the USMCA. By a vote of 89 to 10, the USMCA has now passed the Senate, which means it goes on to the president. This is the biggest bipartisan legislative achievement for President Trump in his term. I want to bring back in Capitol Hill correspondent Chad Pergram. We talked about the difference here of this success and then obviously the trial that's officially beginning today, Chad. But it is significant that this new NAFTA, if you will, is finally across the finish line.
Yeah, again, the fact that people thought that this was going to be a far reach for the president, and look at that roll call vote in the Senate, 89 to 10. It was interesting just in the moments before the vote was closed that Chuck Schumer, the Senate Minority Leader, came out and said that he was going to vote no because of environmental concerns. They got a lot of Democrats on board. Chuck Schumer is somebody who's kind of played both sides of the street on trade. He has been, very appreciative and applauded the president on certain things, especially with China and currency manipulation. That's an issue. But here he votes no. But again, a lot of the Democrats, especially in the House of Representatives, liberal Democrats, Brett, they voted yes because they liked the enforcement provisions. And House Speaker Nancy Pelosi indicated that this was a victory for them. So they're going to walk these articles of impeachment over. The managers are going to come over. The Senate right now, I'm looking at a monitor, is in a posture to receive these articles of impeachment. Chuck Grassley, the president pro tem, is in the chair, and the majority leader, Mitch McConnell, is at the dais. So this is all pivoting from policy to the Senate trial right before our eyes.
There you go.
If they were impeaching him based on those trade agreements, I'd be all for it. I'd be 100% behind it, because those are not about trade. Those are about implementing the international law.
There would be,
commercial law as it pertains to corporations, the law of associations, I guess. I don't know. There's standards of products and
there's any number of things that he could be legitimately impeached for at this point in time. Later on, I've got an update on Iran. I don't know. I may push that off to the third hour. Vicky's going to have to leave a little early today. We have her for the first 2 hours of the show, and the final hour I'll be doing solo, which I've done many things solo. I prefer to have her here, but I appreciate her being here for the first couple of hours of the show today. So, but she's got a prior engagement that she's got to attend to. But, I mean, the thing is that all of this stuff really is him throwing the country under the bus. Make America great again? How do you make America great again when you got a new accelerated NAFTA 2.0 with the Trans-Pacific Partnership rolled into it and a little social justice warrior seasoning on top of it? You know?
It's all mingled together because it's international, you know? That's not making
America great again. You know, and then he had the audacity to actually tweet at Iran yesterday, I think it was, that I guess it was a tweet. Anyway, he said something to the effect of making Iran, you people in Iran should make Iran great again. What does that even mean?
Yeah.
A lot of this stuff, really, I look at him as he's a performer. He's a reality star. And
that's right.
And I think he's filled his role very well. I gave him the benefit of a doubt early on. I think there was some effort. I think there was some desire. I still think there might have been some desire to end the wars early on. But the problem is the neocons and his son-in-law, all these people he put in office in these positions around him, have pressed upon him to the point where, he succumbed. Donald Trump supposedly went to Washington to fight the deep state, and the deep state ended up eating Donald Trump. The swamp has swallowed him. Whether or not he's a part of it or not, he is now. He's become that. So it doesn't really matter what his original intent was as far as I'm concerned. I'm just very, very disgusted, and I'm at the point where I just, I don't want to defend him anymore because of all of the.
I agree with you. I don't.
He came up yesterday. He made some kind of comment about the Second Amendment in the situation in Virginia, which is coming to an apex. And there are people. In fact, it looks like the legislature has backed down to a certain extent on some of the gun control stuff. They're still pushing gun control, but they've, as far as the confiscation is concerned, it looks like, and I have not read the bills, I've just read about them, so I'm just cautioning you ahead of time. But it looks like they've changed some bills as a result of the massive protest. There was one massive protest, and there's supposed to be another one coming up Monday. And so there are some cracks that have been formed, but the governor there is just an absolute tyrant, and the legislature is right there with him. And
I think the Second Amendment people are making a tremendous mistake by protesting no guns at the Capitol. Because I can see there are some places where you don't want 10 or 15,000 people, all of them showing up with guns.
Yeah.
And the state capitol would be one of them.
Yes. The problem is this thing is would be so easy to COINTELPRO.
Exactly.
It would be real easy to co-opt and real easy. I mean, they said they arrested a couple of neo-Nazis or something. We know that some of these groups, like in Charlottesville, Virginia, where they were, there was a lot of opposition groups in there that are controlled opposition groups. Let's just put it that way. And Charlottesville is an example of an area where it can end up making our side look bad if they have people in there doing things that they shouldn't be doing, starting trouble, and especially you don't want trouble started with guns. It's a very volatile situation. So, that's something to be concerned about. Did you see the
video of those alleged white supremacist neo-Nazis?
Which video is this?
Just ridiculous. It was ridiculous.
I don't know which video you're talking about.
Oh, well, there was a video. Was it ABC News or CBS News? I can't remember. But they had a video clip of these three morons that are supposed to be white supremacists. And I'm absolutely positive they're paid FBI stooges.
Well, I wouldn't be a bit surprised.
Somebody's paying them.
Especially if it comes from ABC News, because they have done a lot of
well, it could be
propaganda
even Southern Poverty Law Center or ACLU, because that's the kind of thing that they do. They set up scenarios that they can then point to and say, see, racists.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, yeah, and ABC has been known for editing tapes and things like the ABC, NBC, most of these networks are intellectually dishonest. I mean, they're driven by ratings. That all they care about is ratings and pushing their little agenda forward, and none of them have any integrity, as far as I'm concerned. And it's a sad commentary, but that's just the way we are today. I guess we got to talk a little bit about some. Here's the thing: while USMCA is being passed, a lot of the country is focused on stuff that doesn't matter. Unfortunately, whether you're a Republican, Democrat, or somewhere in between, or somewhere outside of it, there's an agenda. There is a distraction for everyone, and it's like a minefield navigating through current events without stepping on one of these. Getting lost in the distractions.
Did you say mind or mine?
Mine.
Could be either one, though.
Yeah, could be.
Works either way.
For example, there's a stupid controversy going on now between Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders over whether or not he told her that a woman couldn't win the presidency. Now, how stupid is this?
It's really stupid.
The issue came up during the Democratic debate, and it's perfect. It's a perfect object. I'm doing this not because I care about the distraction of the political campaign, but the fact that it's a perfect example as to why you can't trust these big networks, especially CNN. Listen to what they did during the debate. They're asking Bernie Sanders about his comment. This comment, he denies ever making it. Elizabeth Warren says he did. He says he didn't. But, and the whole thing doesn't really matter that much. But, never mind that. We're going to focus and amplify things that are completely, a gnat, on a camel's rear end. We don't care. But anyway, this is what they say.
So, Senator Sanders, I do want to be clear here. You're saying that you never told Senator Warren that a woman could not win the election.
That is correct.
And Senator Warren, what did you think when Senator Sanders told you a woman could not win the election?
I disagreed.
How do you like that? So he just denies ever saying it, and she turns right around and says, "Okay, just to be clear now, you said you never said that." And he says, "That's correct. I never said it." Well, then she turns to the other candidate and says, "So what did you think when he said that?" I mean, hello?
And everybody knows that Elizabeth Warren is a congenital liar.
Well, yeah, I mean, Miss Pocahontas, but, let me play it one more time.
So, Senator Sanders, I do want to be clear here. You're saying that you never told Senator Warren that a woman could not win the election.
That is correct.
And Senator Warren, what did you think when Senator Sanders told you a woman could not win the election?
I disagreed.
Can you believe that? I mean, that is so in your face, so ridiculous. I mean, talk about intellectual dishonesty.
Biased against Bernie.
It is it is a perfect example.
You are fake news.
It is a perfect example of why people don't trust these networks. And nor should they trust these networks. After that debate, I got one more clip from it. There was a hot mic incident where Elizabeth Warren went over to confront Bernie Sanders. I just think it was interesting. To me, it almost smelled like a setup.
With applause still ringing at the end of the Democratic debate in Iowa last night, the simmering feud between Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders suddenly boiled over.
I think you called me a liar on national TV.
What?
I think you called me a liar on national TV.
Let's not do it right now. You want to have that discussion, we'll have that discussion. You called me. You told me. All right, let's not do it now.
I don't want to get in the middle of it. I just want to say hi, Bernie.
Yeah, good. Okay.
She walked away without a hand.
Okay, so everybody's going on about how she didn't shake Bernie's hand and blah, blah, blah. And It's apparent to me that CNN is in cooperation with Elizabeth Warren. She's the establishment candidate between the two of them. Bernie is a communist. I don't want Bernie in there either. But he's an anti-war person, and he seems to be not the establishment's choice. Obviously, the Democratic Party, he would have won the nomination in 2016 had the Democratic National Committee not taken it from him and given it to Hillary Clinton. They basically stole the nomination from Bernie Sanders. And so a lot of the people in the Democratic Party are against Bernie, or against the establishment party because of that. And it seems like CNN has teamed up with Elizabeth Warren. And so this hot mic incident, I kind of suspect might very well have been their attempt to try to get Bernie to say something. But really, what I think...
I'm absolutely sure of it. And I think they do that sort of thing a lot to give people a lot to talk about, like a big gossip thing rather than the issues.
Yeah. And that's what's happening, unfortunately. And they're going to focus a lot of attention on that. And I'm done with it, to be honest with you. And of course, we had the very dramatic article walk. Nancy Pelosi finally sent the impeachment articles over to the Senate to be discussed. So here's another thing that, they made a big spectacle out of that.
The history of this moment, as a student of American history, people are going to be studying this for a long time.
Just the ceremony of it, walking over.
The ceremony.
Delivering the articles of impeachment.
The House clerk right now appears to still be holding on to the articles of impeachment from what we can tell from the cameras right there.
Through the rotunda, through Statuary Hall, back to the House of Representatives.
And just thinking about the history that they're walking through.
This is history. Nia, this is history unfolding.
There's a sacramental quality to this. There's a ritual.
I'm so glad Chris used the word ritual, because that's the word that has been stuck in my head about this all day today. There is something almost religious to it.
Religious. And I think Pelosi's a real believer in this, about ritual.
She said he's been impeached forever. They can never erase that. And
there's
there's
a sacramental statement for life, like a priest for life. It is a perfect statement of what she is. I think she's very reverential.
A lot of members felt, and they told me as they were waiting, that this was an historic moment they didn't want to miss.
One of the things these senators are going to have to think about is, what do they want us to think about when we look at their portrait?
And some of them might think there will be actual statues that we will someday walk by.
The building is filled with statues to remind us of people who are the great people before us. I think there's also something about the sort of the excommunication aspect of this thing. In the French Revolution, did the guy getting his head taken off hear the drum roll? Why is there a drum roll? Why is there so much ritual in life?
These people are nuts. But that's the...
It makes me sick. Makes me sick to my stomach.
Well, the jubilant celebration, and of course a lot of the discussion is taking place around the fact that Nancy Pelosi was saying something about it being such a somber event and everything. And at the signing of, she was passing out pins, celebratory pins. So it's such a somber event,
Maybe that's the only way they can raise money for the Democrat Party, selling pins on eBay. I don't know. They may have ruined the.
They may have ruined what?
For me forever.
What's that?
I said they may have ruined any sort of solemn ceremony for me forever.
Yeah.
Because it's so disgusting. It is such a farce. I mean, they're trying to recreate, like the Kennedy time frame, when everything was solemn, the funeral, all of that stuff. The moments of history that are supposed to be become monumental moments in history. But this is so stupid. It is so... The whole thing is so stupid. I'm not even sure that they're not applying American law.
Mm-hmm.
They may be applying the principles in the Helsinki agreements, like I said, the ones that created the European Union and the European Council. They may be applying those principles.
Yeah. It reminds me of
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, it reminds me of the Tanya Tucker song we used to use while the rest of the country is still sleeping, they'll be bidding America goodbye.
Yeah.
You know, people just are not awake to what really matters. You know, they're more awake now than they were back when we started on this several years ago. But still, to this day, people are off track, focused on things that don't matter. You know.
Well, you know what kills me is there are so many groups talking about the Constitution this, the Constitution that. But I bet the vast majority of them don't understand these international agreements. They understand the UN sits up there, but how do you get from the UN to the U.S. Department of Justice and the changing of our domestic laws through Congress? How does that process happen? And if you can't explain that to me, then you don't know what you're talking about.
Well, nobody's going to explain it to you because they're busy watching Jeopardy. Jeopardy contestants were shown a picture of Adam Schiff, Vicky. None of them were able to describe who the guy was. Now, we just went through the impeachment ceremony in the House, and Schiff chaired that whole thing, and yet nobody could, on the Jeopardy, these are supposedly some of the most intelligent people there, they didn't even know who he was when his picture was shown.
U.S. Representatives for 12.
1/53 of California's House delegation is this Intelligence Committee chairman. His name is Adam Schiff. Back to you, Veronica.
Back to you, Veronica. So,
that's shocking.
Nobody gives a crap. Nobody cares. Anyway, well, we had an interesting thing happen this week. The entire Russian government resigned.
A major reshuffle of the Kremlin. Russian Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev has just announced that he and the entire Russian government will resign. Fred Plotkin is live in Moscow for us. Fred, huge development here. Talk us through what more we know at this stage.
You're absolutely right, Julie. It certainly is a massive development, and it really one that came absolutely surprising to folks here in Russia, to everybody who's observing Russia as well. I can tell you that when this announcement happened, Russian state TV didn't even break into it. They continued their regular programming because even they hadn't heard and they hadn't been informed that this was going to happen. Then a couple of minutes later, there was some video of Vladimir Putin speaking with Dmitry Medvedev, and then he made this announcement saying that he and his entire government would resign. Now, I have his statement here. I'm going to paraphrase from it. He said that significant changes not only to a number of articles of the Constitution, but to the balance of power as a whole were announced. Vladimir Putin had his State of the Union address today where he called for some changes to Russia's Constitution to give actually the parliament more power and less power to the presidency, which some people see as Vladimir Putin preparing for 2024 when his term runs out and when normally he would have to leave power as far as the Constitution of this country is concerned. So he announced some things that he wanted to happen, and part of that pertained to the way that the prime minister is elected, which he says in the future should happen by the parliament and not by the presidency as it has been in the past. So those were some fundamental things that Vladimir Putin said earlier today. And Dmitry Medvedev then in his statement, he said, in the context of that, we as the government should provide the president of our country with the opportunity to make all the decisions necessary for this. And in these conditions, I believe it would be right in accordance with Section 1117 of the Constitution, the government would resign. So Dmitry Medvedev there announcing his resignation, announcing the entire government's resignation. Vladimir Putin was actually seated next to him as he made this announcement on national TV then. And Vladimir Putin then accepted that resignation. He said not everything had gone well, but he did thank the government. And then Vladimir Putin said that this current government is going to stay in power as in a caretaker function while Vladimir Putin speaks with every single minister personally and then decides whether or not these ministers are going to be able to continue or get back into their portfolios or whether they will leave. Now, as far as Dmitry Medvedev himself is concerned, who, of course, for 4 years was also the president of this country, there is already talk of him going on Russia's National Security Council. But right now, what you have here is a massive shakeup in the government, a massive shakeup possibly also in the power structure here as well. But, of course, Vladimir Putin still very much in the driver's seat as far as Russian politics concerned, as far as the Russian state itself is concerned as well, Julia.
So what do you think of that? It looks like that they are completely reorganizing, and is the purpose so that they can comfortably merge with the European Union?
Well, okay, let me ask you this. What do you think the whole purpose of Nancy Pelosi's impeachment deal is about?
Aside from the obvious distraction?
They believe that the president has too much power. Of course, it's the Congress that has given the president the power.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. I think Putin is running kind of a gambit. You know, I don't believe for a second that he's given up.
That he's given up power.
Right. They may actually.
Well, that's what they're. That's what the media's narrative is this is something he's doing to maintain power. See, when I first saw that, I mean, I guess he's got to leave the presidency or whatever soon anyway, and so he's planning for his eventual leaving office and reorganizing things into more of a parliamentary type of system.
Right, and I'll bet that it aligns with the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, which I believe is the deliberative body for basically the nations that belong to that have signed the Helsinki Final Act, but ultimately it's the global governing system, the parliamentary body for the global governing system.
So you're believing, if your thesis is correct, then you would be saying that basically Putin is playing along with the world, basically the New World Order, and in establishing and helping to merge Russia with the rest of Europe.
Well, and the question I have in my mind, yes, that is what I think, but the question in my mind is it real, or is he just doing this as a demonstration on the world stage, a show for people in our Congress?
Basically, a bone for the other side.
Yeah, something for them to hold on to. I don't know. It seems to me like it's a game. How does a government all resign?
Yeah.
I'm not buying it.
Well, it is fascinating. It certainly is a fascinating move, and I don't know really what's behind it either. And all we can really do is speculate because we don't have Putin here to sit him down and ask him.
Right, to look into his eyes, as George Bush said,
yeah.
To see what he's thinking. But
I know he's really smart.
I'm very skeptical that it's real.
Putin is really, really smart. I get that impression every time I hear anything the man says. Obviously, I don't speak Russian, but here's the thing, Vicky. We were talking earlier about how people get distracted and how people are propagandized. The beautiful thing about today's age is that if you really want the truth, you can get closer to the truth now than you ever have been able to before. We have got so many great tools now. I mean, it is incredible. We can go to foreign websites and translate them into English and actually see what their governments are saying. Twitter. I subscribe to Iran. I subscribe to, like the prime ministers or whatever they're called over there. Their tweets, and I get notifications when they tweet, and when they tweet, well, Iraq, in the case of Iraq, I believe they tweet in English and Arabic, but Iran, it's Persian. The thing is that if it's a tweet that's not in English, they actually have a translate button where you can hit the button and translate it into English. So you can see in real time what the parties are saying. And so anytime you're being propagandized, anytime anything happens on the world stage, as they say, I always go to the other party, whoever it's about, and I listen to what they're saying. And they may be lying too. In the case of Iran, I defended Iran last week because I think there's a lot of lies being told about this Soleimani guy. That doesn't mean I'm all in the tank for Iran either. because, frankly, they lied too. They lied about the 80 people that they killed. That was a lie. They also lied about shooting down the commercial airliner. Originally, they denied it. Then later on, eventually they admitted it and apologized for it. That doesn't look good for them. So then at that point, and then they said it was an accident. But, at that point, they've lied twice. How can you believe them when they say it's an accident? I mean, I don't know what the case is. I don't, but the point is that the important thing, though, is that you can find out what all the parties are saying now. You don't have to rely upon the media. The media, the establishment media, has become so irrelevant for people who really want to be informed. It is really, in many respects, a great time to be alive. We're watching history unfold every single day. We have a front row seats on the whole thing, and we're able to go on and find information that previous generations never were able to find. I mean, literally in real time as it evolves. And
yes,
it's incredible. It's really an incredible phenomenon. And I think that's part of the reason why the other side struggles to keep a narrative in place. Even now with social, all the social media censorship and everything, they can't stop it. They can't put the genie back in the bottle. Not very easily. Anyway.
The only way is to kick everybody off the internet and go back to pre-internet.
Yeah, and I mean, that would be very, very difficult to do since there's a whole economic, entanglement surrounding internet at this point in time. I think if they had it to do over again, they probably would have licensed people. It would have
could be, yeah.
They would have tried to license people. That would have been I think there's a number of different ways they would have done it differently if they had it to do over again. But but they don't, and so now here we are. But
I think with Iran, what they are up against is a global communism. Iran is trying to maintain the sovereignty of their nation state, while the international system is trying to dissolve their sovereignty. And that's really what it comes down to, just like they're trying to dissolve our sovereignty.
Yeah, I wasn't going to
economic and social means.
I'll tell you what, I wasn't going to do this now, but since we're on the topic, by the way, we learned also this week another thing that Trump apparently authorized this Soleimani assassination 7 months prior to when it actually happened. So this was apparently in the planning stages for a long time. So this Iranian general that Trump murdered, Qasem Soleimani, who was fighting, again, the U.S.-backed terrorists, ISIS terrorists in Iraq and Syria. As I said, he's been smeared, but that's what you do in a wartime situation. You propagandize and lie about the people you want to destroy. But it's interesting to me what the media was saying about him years ago. He wasn't so disliked in the media years ago when he was actually whooping ISIS's hind end. Here's a little piece, Vicky, that I found from the Wall Street Journal from 2015. Listen to what they say about Qasem Soleimani.
Qasem Soleimani has long been one of the spy world's most elusive figures, and that's been by design. He's the head of the Quds Force, the elite Iranian paramilitary unit that operates on foreign soil. But a general who has dwelled mostly in the shadows is now the face of Iran's involvement in helping Iraq thwart ISIS. And he's achieved that in part by becoming something of a social media sensation. The dates and locations of these photos are all unverified, but they've been showing up everywhere on Twitter over the last several months, seeming to depict Soleimani in everything from battlefield scenes to tea-drinking sessions. In one shot, he's fraternizing with soldiers in what may be Iraq. In others, he appears to be surrounded by a posse of commanders. And in others still, he's flashing a big smile. There are even video tributes to him online. It's unclear whether all this social media activity is part of a government propaganda push to more firmly establish Iran's presence inside Iraq. For years, Iran has wielded its influence abroad from behind the scenes through proxies like Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in the Palestinian territories. But the rise of ISIS and the civil war in Syria have changed that stance. Now, Iranian military advisors like Soleimani openly direct militias abroad. In Iraq alone, Iranians coordinate as many as 100,000 Iraqi fighters in the face-off against ISIS.
In the face-off against ISIS. That's the Wall Street Journal in 2015. Admitting that Soleimani is fighting ISIS. So this isn't something I just make up, and I know you're not saying that, Vicky, but other people might say, well, maybe you're in the pocket of the mullahs. This is something somebody. I mean, you're not a Putin puppet now. You're a mullah puppet. That's kind of these kind of stupid arguments people put forward when they don't have any other response. But yes,
yeah. Well, I can see how people are being manipulated all over the world. I see how our people in our country are being manipulated because the international system is making war on sovereignty. Mm-hmm. So every country they focus on to disintegrate their government, the color revolutions, everyone they focus on, the people rise up to fight, for the sovereignty of their country. But they don't understand this bigger international system. And so the way the international system works is through coalitions of other countries. And so, you market the idea that the people of a country are actually the enemies of the country, just like they've done with us.
Yeah.
They consider us to be domestic terrorists. Why? Because we believe in the sovereignty of our country and we want a sovereign nation. And that makes us, from the point of view of the international system, that makes us terrorists.
Yeah. Yeah, that's how they think of us.
Which is what makes the whole thing so confusing, is so convoluted, because the people who believe in nationalism, their national sovereignty, become terrorists in their own country.
And that's why Iran has to die, because they're nationalists. They're all in favor of the sovereignty of Iran. And I'm not, I don't care about Iran per se. I mean, other than the fact that they're one of the least radical Muslim countries in the Middle East. Why are we pairing with Saudi Arabia? Why are we pairing with the Sunni Wahhabists when, it seems to me like a much better ally would be Iran. I think we could work with them better than we can Saudi Arabia. I'll get to Saudi Arabia in a second. But, one of the claims we've heard countless times to smear this guy, Soleimani, is that he killed 600 Americans. That was one thing that one guy on Twitter that I was going back and forth with was saying that, this guy is responsible for all these people, blew him to bits. Well, where did that claim come from? I managed to trace it back to the State Department. This is the State Department press briefing from April 2nd of last year with Ambassador Hook, U.S. Special Representative for Iran. He makes the claim along with a bunch of other lies about Iran.
In Iraq, I can announce today, based on declassified U.S. military reports, that Iran is responsible for the deaths of at least 608 American service members. This accounts for 17% of all deaths of U.S. personnel in Iraq from 2003 to 2011. This death toll is in addition to the many thousands of Iraqis killed by the IRGC's proxies.
Okay, there's no way to verify any of these claims. But the Military Times came out with an article, and this article was called "Iran Killed More U.S. Troops in Iraq Than Previously Known, Pentagon Says." And they say the Pentagon is upping the official estimate on the number of U.S. troops in Iraq who were killed by Iranian-backed militias, now putting that number of at least 603. Officials previously said that Iran was linked to roughly 500 troop deaths. That means roughly 1 in every 6 American Think about this, Vicky. They say that means roughly 1 in every 6 American combat fatalities in Iraq were attributable to Iran. Now, how is that even possible?
Yeah, I don't really believe that, because Iran and Iraq were at war with each other. So it doesn't seem like that Iran, especially back then.
Well, first of all,
things have changed in the decade and a half since there was that war. But when it happened, Iran and Iraq, they were at odds with each other because the Iraqi government, Saddam Hussein, was a Sunni, and Iran are Shias.
Yeah, Gareth
So
Porter.
they have that religious thing between them.
Gareth Porter wrote an article in Anti-War about this. He says one of the many myths that have been used to justify the push for war with Iran, led by National Security Advisor John Bolton and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, is that Tehran is responsible for the killing of more than 600 U.S. troops during the Iraq War. Special Representative for Iran, Brian Hook, which you just heard from, whose job is to round up international support for the Trump administration's campaign of maximum pressure on Iran, presented the charge at the State Department press briefing on April 2nd. We just played the audio. Iran, he says Navy Commander Sean Robertson followed up with an email to media outlets pushing that same line. When this writer asked Robertson, now get this is important. When this writer asked Robertson for further clarification of the origins of that figure, however, he acknowledged that the Pentagon doesn't have any study, documentation, or data to provide journalists that would support such a figure. So, in fact, the myth that Tehran is responsible for killing over 600 U.S. troops in the Iraq War is merely a new variant of a propaganda line that former Vice President Dick Cheney used to attempt to justify a war against Iran more than a decade ago. Reviewing the history of that earlier effort is necessary to understand why the new myth is a palpable lie. So he goes on from there. The point is that, thankfully, unfortunately, CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, and none of these networks are going to follow up and ask and do real journalism and ask why, where are you getting this number from? Pushing back a little bit. No. We got to swallow everything that the Pentagon says or the State Department. We got to swallow everything that they say without any question. Thankfully, we have independent journalists that actually push back a little bit and say, where are you getting it from? And they say, I guess we have nothing. We made it up,
They're
basically.
just statistics of convenience.
Yeah, well, they're statistics of BS is what they are. They're completely made up. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing. The first casualty of war, folks, is the truth. Now, I'll finish with this from the Syrian ambassador to India. His name is Daniel-Chuburu, who was asked what he thought about the U.S. assassination of Soleimani. And again, honestly, I don't have a dog on the fight. I don't care about Soleimani. I care about the truth, and that's why I'm spending time to do this. Soleimani, I'm sure he's not perfect. I'm not suggesting that he is. But I also don't think that we want the world to be blown up in a big fireball. And I don't care if it's Republican, Democrat. Policy over personality, people. That's the bottom line. Quit blindly following a politician down the cow path and over the cliff just because you think he's entertaining. Because you like his personality. Trump is not your friend any more than Obama was your friend. And that's the point. This guy, you have to listen carefully because he's got a strong accent. But this is the ambassador to India from Syria, Daniel-Chuburu, and he nails it right here in this clip.
This process reviews for all in the earth the crimes of America. Second, this process will make a danger, escalation, violence in the region. Third, maybe this will start a regional war in the region and proves for us how much America is keen to protect the terror group in the ground, because America killed the leader who is against those terror groups, the leader Qasem Soleimani, who was the leader of military group who defeated the ISIS in the ground of Iraq and Syria. This ISIS, which is created by CIA, American Department of Intelligence, now it was defeated by Qasem Soleimani. Because America is keen to protect ISIS, they kill Mr. Qasem Soleimani.
There you go. I don't know if you could make out what he said, but basically...
Yeah, that was kind of hard to understand, but he said the CIA created ISIS, and our military is blaming Iran for the things that ISIS does that the State Department leads.
Yeah, and he thought
something like that, right?
It could escalate into a regional war. Yeah, and the reason why the U.S. killed him is because they're keen to protect ISIS. And that's the problem. Yeah. So are we going to see a return, a re-escalation of the ISIS terrorist group now that the Soleimani is gone? That's the question. You know, everything that the U.S. State Department seems to be doing appears to be something that is designed to cause regional instability in the Middle East and cause a more radicalization of the Middle East. And why would they want to do that?
How many more countries have to fall there? What is there? There's Yemen. And are there any other countries that over in that region that have to be regionalized under the international system?
Well, let's go back to the West Clark 7. Give me just a second here. Here we go. West Clark 7 after 9/11. This is what he said, you know, they had as their target.
About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who used to work for me, and one of the generals called me in. He said, "Sir, you got to come in. You got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, "No." He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, I just got this down from upstairs," meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran." I said, "Is it classified?" He said, "Yes, sir." I said, "Well, don't show it to me." And I saw him a year or so ago, and I said, "You remember that?" He said, "Sir, I didn't show you that memo. I didn't show it to you."
I'm sorry, what did you say his name was?
I'm not going to give you his name.
So go through the countries again?
Well, starting with Iraq, then Syria and Lebanon, then Libya, then Somalia and Sudan, and then back to Iran.
There you go. So there's your answer.
Yeah.
The axis of evil, Vicky.
He knows what he knows what the story is. You know, he was just modifying it for the audience as if, you know, he knew it, but he didn't know it, you know, but that's the idea. Take them all out and implement global regionalism.
Yeah, global regionalism, and this is being done. You know, again, I come back to the Oded Yinan plan, you know, because that seems to be being followed, as well as the project for the New American Century Report, which I've referred to often on the show. This blueprint for the war on terror that was developed it was published September 2000, before 9/11 ever happened, a year before 9/11. And they even say in the report that it's impossible probably to implement it unless there's a new Pearl Harbor. Well, gee, what convenient thing, 1 year to the month later, they had their Pearl Harbor, and they pulled it off. They planned the work, then they implemented the plan. And they're still implementing the plan, which is global totalitarian governance.
Right. And John Ashcroft reorganized our Justice Department. War on terror, an international war on terror. So they basically internationalized our Department of Justice. Our government has been bifurcated. We have the domestic face. I'm not sure that the domestic face has much power, but there are international agencies, parts of the agencies behind, that our government really doesn't talk about.
Yep.
But I do believe they are the deep state. They are the deep state.
Absolutely, they are. Well, we're out of this hour already, and we're about to transition into the next hour. Time's going by very quickly. This is Govern America. Vicky Davis, Darren Weeks, and you. We'll be back here in just a moment.
Before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order.
New world order.
New world order.
This is a moment to seize. The kaleidoscope has been shaken. The pieces are in flux. Soon they will settle again. Before they do, let us reorder this world around us.
A new world order. A world where the United Nations is poised to fulfill the historic vision of its founders.
Nevertheless, the United States is in a key position to shape this so that the problem of the Bush presidency will be the emergence of a new international order.
The first decade of the 21st century, that out of what will be seen as the greatest restructuring of the global economy, a new world order was created.
Documenting the crisis of our republic.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
Waging war on the New World Order.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
This is Govern America with Darren Weeks and Vicky Davis.
Live from FEMA Regions 5 and 10, this is Govern America. I'm Darren Weeks, and we have Vicky Davis here as well, at least for this hour, as we continue on here on this 18th of January 2020. Those that are brave enough to wander outside today might be in for a rude awakening in much of the country, apparently. I know that's the case where I am, and so I'm not sure I'm going to wait outside. We'll see. I'll probably go out there and just have a sample as to how the roads are and everything, and we'll determine that. But we're supposed to get another inch or two, so it's certainly winter has hit here in southern Michigan. No question about that. But anyway, this hour I want to turn our attention. By the way, I don't know if you saw this, but let me just do this real quick. GovernAmerica.com is the website for the show, GovernAmerica.com. And my email address is radio@governamerica.com. Vicky, go ahead and give your information out.
Okay, my website is thetechnocratictyranny.com, and my email address is eyeswideoopen@channelingreality.com, which is the name of my old website.
All right, very good. And so check out all of her research and information, more going up all the time. I don't know if you saw this, but apparently Alan Dershowitz and Ken Starr are on Trump's impeachment defense team. Why in the world would he have Alan Dershowitz on there, who was very involved in the Jeffrey Epstein situation? I believe Alan Dershowitz, if I'm not mistaken, actually admitted to getting a massage in his underwear. Originally he denied it, I guess, and then he said that he got a massage, but it wasn't anybody underage, and it just doesn't look good at all. I'm not going to say anything about Alan Dershowitz. I have no proof one way or the other, but I think it's very, very odd how these people keep getting in Trump's orbit. It just, I don't know.
Yeah, you wouldn't think that. Well, you know what I think about Ken Starr? I think the whole impeachment.
The whole what?
Was a distraction as well.
Yeah.
The
impeachment
show.
Well, Bill Clinton should have been impeached, but again, he should have been impeached for other things, in my opinion.
Right, and they settled on he lied to a grand jury about being unfaithful to his wife.
Yeah.
I mean, what
they
man
made it
isn't
about
going
the
to do
sex.
that?
They made it about the sex. They made it about the affair, which I'm sure Hillary Clinton doesn't care. I'm sure she doesn't care. Their marriage was one of convenience. Chelsea Clinton, Hillary and Bill Clinton might never have even had sex. I say that. It might very well be the case that they've never even been romantically involved. I'll tell you who, Chelsea Clinton, if you look at her picture right next to Webster Hubbell, she is a spitting image of Webster Hubbell.
That's an inconvenient truth, isn't it?
You look at her next to Webster Hubbell. I'm telling you, it's a dead ringer. It is unbelievable. Mm-hmm. And she was asked about that at some book signing ceremony, and she didn't deny it. Somebody said something about her father, and she says, it was some kind of general statement. She smiled, and she says, "I'm happy to be my father's daughter," or something like that. She never denied it. It was some stupid comment that she dodged the bullet.
Yeah, that was mean of somebody to do that.
Well, I don't know. I
don't know. I just think some things should be private. That's all.
Well, yeah, maybe. I don't know. But when they're lying,
not for the public's
when they're lying
stage.
Up a storm. Why lie about it? If she had an affair, if they have an open marriage, why not just come right out with it? Why be phony about it? If that's your value system. And I guess that's why I don't have a problem with it. Because, hey, she doesn't have to answer the question. And, in fact, she didn't. But, if you don't want don't pretend to be the happy couple that you're all in love and everything to try to sell your whole relationship and your supposed integrity to the American people and then turn around and be doing all this other stuff behind the scenes. It's hypocritical. Anyway, I got a problem with it, obviously.
Yeah.
By the way, Department of Justice is now investigating James Comey. I think we mentioned before that there was a possibility that would happen because, speaking of liars, James Comey, he lied. The RT says the U.S. Department of Justice has opened a probe into whether the former FBI Director James Comey leaked details about classified intelligence to reporters covering the Hillary Clinton email server scandal. So I guess it's the leak that he's being investigated for. Led by federal prosecutors, the inquiry is focused on two 2017 news stories for which Comey is suspected to have been the source, divulging the contents of a classified intelligence document, according to the New York Times report on Thursday. The pair of stories, published by the Times, and the Washington Post in 2017 cited an alleged Russian intelligence document obtained by Dutch security services, which earlier played a key role in Comey's decision to forego changes for former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton in the server scandal. So it goes on from there, but I just wanted to point out that apparently Comey's under investigation. Will this go anywhere? I highly doubt it. But
yeah, well, the interesting thing to me is that the document came from Dutch intelligence officials, and that, there is a global intelligence system, and that's exactly what I was talking about when I said our government has been bifurcated. So, we will be at war forever, because there will always be internationalists and nationalists, and they will be at war with each other forever.
Yeah. Amen. So, anyway, moving along here, we see from American military news, 2 Chinese nationals are accused of taking pictures at restricted U.S. naval property. They say 2 Chinese nationals who attend the University of Michigan. Remember, we used to have William Kaufman on here talking about how the University of Michigan was overrun with communist Chinese from Harbin Institute?
I sure do.
And he tried to warn people, and he was basically fired for doing that, for refusing to give his information up to these people and going up the chain and trying to make some noise about it. Well, here we go. The Chinese nationals who attend the University of Michigan were arrested after entering a restricted naval base in Florida and snapping photographs. Yuhao Wang and Juling Zhang appeared Monday in the U.S. District Court of Southern Florida on a criminal complaint charging they had entered the military, naval, or Coast Guard property for the purpose of photographing defense installations. The pair were arrested Saturday, and I guess this was probably last Saturday. I'm not quite sure. This was dated January 8th, so must have been, it was earlier than that. But anyway, they were arrested recently after allegedly defying a U.S. Navy Security Forces Master of Arms manning the guard station at the entrance of 6B Annex Naval Air Station in Key West, Florida. After 30 minutes on the restricted property, they were located by security. Both had, isn't that amazing that they lasted for 30 minutes without being located?
I was just thinking that. How did that happen? 30 minutes.
That's quite a long time.
Yeah.
It seems. Boy, that doesn't make you feel good. Both had cell phones, and Zhang and Nikon camera with photographs of the annex property, including U.S. military structures on Fleming Key, the federal complaint notes. According to the complaint, Zhang and Wang approached the guard station at the annex entrance at 8:30 a.m. Saturday in a blue four-door Hyundai. They spoke with the Master of Arms, who requested military identification, which neither could provide. Wang, who was the driver, then ignored the guard's instruction to turn the vehicle around and proceeded to drive forward and continue onto his 6B's annex in contradiction to the instructions from the MA, an affidavit by FBI Special Agent Chris Kutheimer reads. After tracking,
I thought those guards at the gates would shoot you if you drove through without permission.
Well, apparently not.
Oh, my God.
So, I don't know what kind of security. Apparently, it's not as tight as maybe other installations, but I don't know anymore. You don't know. So, I'll leave that article there.
So ID into closed U.S. facilities is just a suggestion.
Yeah, exactly. I guess so.
Please tell us who you are.
And also, here we see from oil price. Is Iraq about to become a Chinese client state? Following the political and popular backlash in Iran over details of its plans to make the Islamic Republic effectively a client state through various multi-layered oil and gas deals, China has
Belt and Road with the pipelines running down the road.
China has switched its attention for the moment to Iran's close ally and neighbor, Iraq. Like Iran, Iraq has enormous and still relatively underdeveloped oil and gas reserves. It is an irreplaceable geographical stepping stone in China's One Belt, One Road program, and it is in need of a major ongoing funding. China already has leverage over Iraq as the leading oil company, Rosneft, of its close geopolitical ally, Russia. Already has effective control over the oil and gas infrastructure of the North Iraq semi-autonomous region of Kurdistan, and Chinese companies operate on a number of fields in South Iraq. Last week saw key developments in China's cornerstone project of making Iraq into a client state. You know, we've talked about this on the show, about how China has been building infrastructure in Africa, you know, and that thereby making Africa and, you know, basically buying influence in the region. And I think it's
that's the global transportation system, by the way. That's an international project under the WTO and the World Customs Organization. But go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that, you know, Hillary Clinton herself had made comments about, you know, with Africa, there being a superhighway, something like a superhighway system, which reminded me a lot of the North American superhighway system that they were trying to build here. Which
exactly the same. Same system. Which
will undoubtedly happen or be pushed for again under this new USMCA thing, which will become law as soon as Trump signs it. And he will sign it. I mean, that's... he was brought in to office probably partly to accomplish this, whether or not he was one of the chosen one or not. Whoever was going to be brought in, this was Carla Hills. I come back to Carla Hills, former trade representative, before Trump was even a factor, made the statement that NAFTA needed to be updated. And so this was a well-oiled plan, well-laid-out plan ahead of time to update NAFTA. And they got it done. And it wasn't a long shot like that news report we played said. Nothing long shot, because whenever people in Congress come together in any kind of bipartisan fashion, it's generally for the destruction of the country. Sad to say.
Yeah, isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
And why is that? Because the international system is destroying nation states. So...
Which brings me to your article, One Country, Two Systems, Vicky. I'd like to discuss that in the time that we have remaining, because we've been trying to get to that for weeks. You wrote about the Sino-British Joint Declaration in 1984, which stemmed from the UN Declaration on the Granting of Independence to Colonial Countries in 1960. You want to talk about this some?
Yeah. A lot of what I do might seem to be irrelevant, but what I do is I go back in history and try to find the beginning point of when things started to change, so that I can know for sure what it is that I'm saying is true. Mm-hmm. And you know, so that when I talk about the international system, I can walk you through from when it started up until today and show you the documents and everything that was done, so that you can know that it's true.
Right.
And one thing that I found was that, and I just kind of stumbled onto this. A lot of the stuff that I find, I stumble onto it when I'm searching for something else. And I found this agreement between Britain and China relevant to the status.
Boy, Skype is really messing up today.
Pardon me?
I said Skype has given us a run for our money today. For some reason, it's worse than usual. But
maybe it doesn't like what I'm saying.
Well, it's kind of been that way the whole show. But anyway, go ahead.
Okay. Well, anyway, the British had a maritime empire, and what their strategy was to basically capture ports and then take control of the country through the administrative state. And that's the way that the British built the British Empire, is through ports. And couple of the ports that they captured in Asia was Hong Kong, and they had a long-term agreement in perpetuity for control of Hong Kong. But when the UN passed that resolution about colonial states and countries freeing their colonies, Britain went along with that, and they negotiated with China this Sino-British joint declaration in which they planned. Now, this was negotiated in 1984, and the negotiated agreement was for Britain to turn over control of Hong Kong by 1997. And so, which was really Hong Kong. That's why Hong Kong is having so much trouble now, because they basically are a Western English country.
Yeah.
But now they are controlled by communist China.
Well, that's kind of similar to what they say about Taiwan being one country, two systems as well. And I don't know the history of all of that, but I know that supposedly the United States foreign policy has supposedly been on both sides of that, where we were going to defend Taiwan if China ever attacks them. China's determined to make Taiwan a part of China, and
yeah, I'm not sure what the history is of Taiwan, but I'd bet it's very similar.
I think it is, because they talk about one country, two systems, just like you were discussing with Hong Kong.
Yeah.
So it's really fascinating. Go ahead.
So what Britain and China agreed to was that Hong Kong would become a special administrative region, effectively a port territory, and under the international system, rule of China. It for defense and foreign policy, I guess. Which is, by the way, just occurred to me that those are the same rules that those islands off the British coast operate under. Was it Guernsey? And I'm not sure what all those islands are off of Britain, but that's basically the same arrangement that Britain has with those islands. They are essentially special administrative regions under, I'm not sure if it's autonomous, but I'm sure it's under international law, because that works out very conveniently for the system that is currently being built.
Now, I do have go ahead, I'm sorry.
Oh, I was going to say. So
I was just going to tell you I got the Lawrence-Eagleburger audio if you want me to play some of it later on after you're done there.
Yeah, if you have the part queued up about condominium, that becomes key to this whole thing.
Okay, well, I'll tell you what. How about we just play some of it, and I'll let you comment on it. And I think I do have the condominium part too, but we'll let's just fire away and see. I think it's relevant, whatever we got here.
The president's principal goal is to get a better sense of what's in Gorbachev's head, how he thinks about the world, how he thinks about his own situation in the Soviet Union, and how he thinks about other issues. And
I guess I should explain, too, Lawrence-Eagleburger was the U.S. Deputy Secretary of State in 1989, and this was an appearance he had on C-SPAN where he was talking about an upcoming meeting in Malta between President George Bush, 41st president, and Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev, a meeting where he, Eagleburger, was careful not to call a summit. And why was that so important to him, I don't know. He also made it clear that the meeting really had no purpose other than for the leaders to find out what was on each other's minds, of course.
Well, it was after the fall of the Berlin Wall. It was the first major meeting between government leaders after the fall of the Berlin Wall. And so that meeting at Malta was kind of a, now what do we do? What are we going to do?
Yeah, and they it was taking place on a boat, which is really interesting.
It's very significant because there is no law. Neither one of the leaders of the country were acting under the laws of their own country.
Well,
that's why they do things on islands and boats.
Well, the other thing is, I thought maybe a good part of the reason too was that it got them away from any buildings where there might be listening devices. You know.
Well, that's true, but they've known about that for a long time. When I was up in Alaska, I was doing a contract for ARCO, and ARCO had on their top floor,
they had
floor that had all this. I don't know what you would call it. It's kind of like barriers, and that was because apparently the microphone devices could be pointed up there, and they were powerful enough to pick up what was going on in meetings.
So
and I was really surprised about that. I mean, I had no idea that sort of thing happened, but it does.
So the barriers were designed to be a blocking...
A sound shield, yeah.
To fortify the whole thing from surveillance and eavesdropping. Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, continuing on with Eagleburger.
Give the General Secretary a sense of what is in the President's head and what he thinks about these questions. It is, in essence, then, a question of how can the two better understand each other as they are going to have to deal with each other in the years to come. I think that's the principal objective. President Bush knows what he's walking into. He has made it as clear as it is possible to make it publicly that he does not intend to come out of this meeting with a lot of agreements, that it is for the purpose of getting to know how the other man thinks and give the other man a chance to learn how he thinks. I'm perfectly confident that that's, in fact, the way George Bush will play it. There's another point, too. In the Reykjavik meeting, Mr. Gorbachev tried to play some games. Now, I suppose it's possible he will again at the Malta summit, but, excuse me, I've now said the word myself, at the Malta meeting. But I think it is less likely because it is now so much more clear that Mr. Gorbachev needs the understanding of the U.S. as he deals with his own internal and external problems. And I suspect he will be, if I can use the term, better behaved than he was at Reykjavik.
We've also heard the suggestion that the President and Mr. Gorbachev might talk about how the United States might respond if Mr. Gorbachev feels he has to crack down on some of the uprisings within his own country. Perhaps that he might even be seeking something called a forbearance from the United States, if he has to do that.
He may well raise that. Again, I can't predict it, but it's a possibility. And if he raises it, the President will hear him out. I'm, again, absolutely confident that President Bush is not going to Malta to work out some form of condominium in Eastern Europe or some form of arrangement where the U.S. and the Soviet Union will work together to manage reform in Eastern Europe or in Western Europe, for that matter. But how the President would answer the question if it's put to him by Mr. Gorbachev, I'd have to leave to the President. But I cannot but believe that the Soviets would know that if they had to use force in Eastern Europe or the Soviet Union, there would be a strenuous reaction in this country and in the Western world, and I'm sure the President will tell him that.
In terms of the condominiumization...
Okay, you said it there, because the important concept there is to talk about condominium.
Okay.
In the Oxford Public International Law definition, condominium is a territory over which two or more states jointly exercise governmental authority.
Mm-hmm.
The word co-imperium is also sometimes used in this context, but there is no formal distinction between the two words. Okay, and that's basically how the international system functions. It is a condominium or co-imperium.
Yeah.
Where the
it's kind of like normally what we think with the word condominium, it's like an apartment complex. You know, you buy a condominium, you're not buying the entire apartment complex. You're buying ownership in one little unit. But so that unit is technically co-owned. It's the larger unit is owned by some entity, probably some kind of housing, company or whatever, but you're buying a unit, so that unit is co-owned, so that condominium, it's kind of like similar to the same concept. In this case, you're applying it to a stretch of land, a territorial border place where it is co-governed. Am I right on this?
You are spot on.
Okay.
And the area, the special administrative area, they call it different names. They call it a free trade zone, an enterprise zone, an inland port, a seaport. Ports for commerce, basically, is what it is. And so the ports for commerce are operating under international law, while the rest of the territory is operating under their national law, but within the international law as this whole thing has evolved. But anyway, so that was the deal that Britain made with China, was that Hong Kong was going to be a special administrative unit.
Okay.
Region. Okay, so now what happened in the United States, you can imagine Hong Kong is a tremendously valuable piece of earth because of the technology, just the business that had been built in Hong Kong. And so the United States didn't want to really give up. We have companies that operate in Hong Kong.
Mm-hmm.
So in 1992, Senator Mitch McConnell sponsored a piece of legislation, and you can look this up. It was S. 1731 in 1992, called the U.S. Hong Kong Policy Act of 1992, to define how the United States would accommodate the one country, two systems agreement that China had with Great Britain.
Yeah, that was Public Law 102-383.
Yeah, China is one country, but there are two systems of governance, and with Hong Kong having a separate system of government.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now what that did is that they treated Hong Kong as if it were an independent country, meaning that money could be transferred back and forth, people could do business through Hong Kong. Well, what they did was they opened up a gateway, a back door for communist China to come through Hong Kong and kind of whitewash themselves, sheep dip themselves, from being communist Chinese to becoming Hong Kong citizens. Okay, now part of the deal with Hong Kong was that they could issue their own visas. So a visa from Hong Kong is a different visa than from communist China.
Okay, hold on a second. I want you to repeat that. Are you saying that this Hong Kong was a way for the Chinese basically to go through Hong Kong and be legitimized?
It was like a gateway to the west.
Like a pipeline through Hong Kong.
Yeah.
So basically we're laundering commies.
Well, yes, that's kind of the
Commie laundering.
way it was.
Commie laundering.
And so while people in Hong Kong could invest in Australia, Australia has a really bad China problem at this point, because they had so much money coming in, but I think probably a lot of that money wasn't Hong Kong money, it was Chinese money coming through Hong Kong.
Interesting.
Yeah, so anyway, that's what Mitch McConnell did.
Yeah, and isn't it interesting, once again, Mitch McConnell, even way back then, doing things in favor of the communist Chinese. No wonder he's, was he, I wonder if he was married to Elaine Chao at the time, wasn't he?
Yes, Elaine Chao.
I wonder if she's the one that got him into all that communist Chinese stuff.
I'm sure that Elaine Chao is the one that really wrote that legislation. I think her father was from China, and during the Cultural Revolution, he moved the family to Taiwan, but somehow he became a ship captain, and which really would have been very difficult to do. He had to have connections with the communist Chinese to do that. Anyway, they immigrated to the United States, and then magically he's got a shipping company. So, and Elaine Chao has been involved with transportation, both transportation and labor, but the labor part due in this few minutes. But when George Herbert Walker Bush announced the new transportation system for the United States in 1990, Elaine Chao was a Deputy Secretary of Transportation, or she may have been in the the Maritime Administration. But she was there at the announcement, and she's been there all throughout in the U.S. transportation system, which just coincidentally happens to correspond to the Chinese One Belt, One Road system.
Isn't that amazing how all that fits together?
Yeah, and it's the idea of ports as special administrative regions, and that's what when I did my research on Meridian, Idaho, originally we thought it was like a foreign trade zone, and which it could have become, but it was a special administrative region, which for all intents and purposes becomes an inland port. It just has to be connected to a transportation system, an intermodal transportation system. And so I had no idea what I was finding. I knew it was bad, but I had no idea that it was going to lead to this discovery of this global transportation system and the World Customs Organization. And each one of those ports, as part of the international system, becomes a choke point on the economies of every single country that it goes into.
So it's like controlling the world economy, if I can use that vernacular.
Absolutely. That's why I say that the international system is a communist system, because they will control the economies of all the countries.
Yeah. Well, we know, the United Nations was founded by communists, Alger Hiss and what have you, Harry Dexter White. These people do the things that they do, and these ports, like you say, where the goods and things flow through there, and it's not just goods, but there's also the General Agreement on Trades and Services as well. So everything flows through these ports, though, and they're it's like valves and levers, which can be used to control and manipulate everything in terms of how good or how bad. And this is probably, I wonder how Trump's tariffs fit into all of this, because he seems to like to put a lot of sanctions on countries now, which is really an act of war if you get right down to when you're trying to hurt the economy of another country. I don't think that all of these sanctions are his ideas.
Well, the thing with Trump's tariffs, he says he's collecting billions and billions of dollars, but is he? Or is it just paper? That can be, is it just an entry in a paper that can be wiped out?
Well, I know
I don't necessarily believe
the whole money system is a fraud. So if you really want to get right down to it, what is money? It's all fraudulent. It's all paper.
Right, just digits in a computer at this point.
Yeah. So they don't need it, and for. I don't know. It's very bizarre, because everything we're told now is there's so many layers of this deception. I wonder how this former Prime Minister Robert Hawke, how does he fit into all of this?
Robert Hawke, he was the Prime Minister of Labour Party, by the way, Prime Minister of Australia and he's the one that proposed creating a companion organization, the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation Organization, which is a similar organization, a sister organization to the OECD. I think it's the OECD.
Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, right?
Right. So that countries, and what the idea of these organizations are, is that in order to have a harmonized global system, you have to have compatible systems in every country. The laws have to be the same. And so what they do, they have the U.S. Trade Representative's Office and the State Department have people that work for them that go negotiate at these international meetings, and they discuss things, development things that they can do to create a harmonized global system. And of course, one of them is telecommunications, the transportation system, the tourism, anything where the activity crosses border and you can create an international system. They find the common points, they negotiate those things, and then they make agreements in these international forums, and then those agreements go to our Congress where they're translated into domestic law and programs. And so that's why we, unless you go look at these documents and see what they've negotiated, you have no idea about this whole international system and how it affects particularly.
Yeah, and even if you did catch a piece of it, I mean, unless it's somebody like yourself, I don't know how much you obviously spend a lot of time looking at this. But how many people have that kind of time, and they might come across a piece of it, and they wouldn't understand what the significance of the piece of it really means without all the other pieces. And that's really what they've done is they've, Jackie Petru at one point wrote an article called Piece by Pieces, and that's kind of what they've done. Their definition of peace, of course, is world governance, but they've piecemealed things together in such a way that the average person, the ordinary average person who's living their lives, trying to support a family, trying to just keep their head above water with all the unbelievable taxes and the inflation and everything, either, they're just exhausted most of the time.
Yeah, there's no way. So, I mean, in order for people to have understood any of this, the media would have had to be reporting about it consistently. Yeah. But they never talk about it. Or if they do, they might mention that there's an Asia Pacific meeting, or, Trump is going to a meeting in Singapore or something like that. But they never explain what it's all about.
Well, then they might do a cursory thing about what they're going to be discussing, blah blah blah, but it's not going to be anything detailed. It's just like this Eagleburger audio that we played a moment ago. They were discussing where they were going to head, but with the conversation, but they didn't really discuss what the real conversation was about. Topics that could be, again, the issue of condominium.
Are there any issues that are off limits?
I don't know. I hadn't even thought about that question. If one side or the other, and clearly it wouldn't be the president, were to suggest some sort of condominium approach to dealing with the developments in Europe, clearly from our point of view that would be off limits. But Off limits assumes that there's been some agreement that issue A, B, or C won't be raised at all, and I am not aware of any such discussions or arrangement. Anybody can bring up anything, I suspect. It will then be up to the other side to say, look, that's just an issue I don't want to talk about, or it's not an issue that's worth spending time on.
How does China relate to all of that?
It's obviously important both to Moscow and Washington, and I suspect it would be a subject of discussion between the two in Malta. But in terms of the way you asked the question, how does it relate, I suspect it will not figure large on either leader's agenda in terms of trying to talk to the Soviets or they to us about the future of China or its relationship to the U.S. or to the Soviet Union, in part because China is now going through its own sort of agonizing reappraisal of where it is and where it wants to go, and is therefore somewhat withdrawn from the world scene, and secondly because, at the moment at least, I don't think it figures large on the agenda between the two of us.
Okay, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that you're going to call this BS. That China doesn't factor in.
Well, because George Herbert Walker Bush cooperated with Robert Hawke, who suggested the establishment of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Organization. And so the initial members, there were 12 nation states that started it, and it was like Japan, Australia, the United States. I can't remember the others. But I think it was in 1991 or 1993, China joined it. Mm-hmm. And then a couple of years later, Russia joined it. So we have this organization called the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Organization that doesn't recognize nation states. They only recognize economies. And all the economies in the Asia-Pacific belong to the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Organization. Mm-hmm. And they negotiate the everything that they're going to be working on. I mean, marine fisheries, the transportation system I talked about, telecommunications, human resources development. Now, I don't know how much you've paid attention to what's going on in the education system, but we used to talk about educating our students.
Yeah.
Now we are talking about training them for some vocation.
Absolutely. Workforce development.
There is a difference between training and education.
Yeah. With training, you can train your dog. That doesn't mean you teach them how to read. You know?
Right.
Your dog isn't going to sit down and read a book, but it can go fetch a ball. It can go, you can train it. And that's part of the reason why, like Charlotte Iserbyt used to talk about how teachers give these kids, candy or whatever in the classroom if they get answers right. You're training them like a dog.
Pavlov's dogs.
And the problem with that, of course, is that, they'll only do what's right. They'll only be interested in getting things right. They'll only be interested in proper morality if there's a proper reward in the end for them to do so. What we want are people who do the right thing, learn the right thing, even in the face of opposition, even in the face of no rewards being at the other side, at the end. You want them to do the right thing because they're of high moral character, because they're of high integrity, and right is right and wrong is wrong.
Yeah, doing the right thing is painful.
Yes.
They're training students for a truly fascist country where workers are just slaves. Mm-hmm. You don't.
But that's what they want. They want people who respond to stimuli and operate and don't think situations through too clearly. But you just follow orders because in the end, that's the only way you're going to be rewarded. And that is in and of itself.
You regurgitate what you're told is basically what it is, but you don't really think for yourself.
Yes.
And that's what all this group stuff is about.
Mm-hmm.
You never think independently. You must always think with a group.
Yeah, or the community. Or the community. Be a communitarian whatever, slave. So anyway, former Australian Prime Minister Robert Hawke, we just mentioned him. Here's some audio from him where he's making the case before Congress for more cooperation between Australia and the U.S.
Do our NATO allies have any cause for nervousness as Malta approaches?
No, none at all. That doesn't mean they won't be nervous, but they don't have any reason for it. The President has been very careful to keep the allies informed. They know in, I think, large measure what we...
Okay, I'm sorry. That's the wrong clip.
Yeah, I was wondering.
Epic fail. This is Hawke.
We support a strong American involvement in Asia and the Pacific, and we believe that your bases in the Philippines make a crucial contribution to the security and confidence of our region. My government has conducted the most thorough review of Australian defence policy in many years. Our policy emphasises the shouldering of our own responsibilities, defence self-reliance, modernisation, regional commitment, and the development of strong, independent military capabilities within the framework of the alliance. Our economic relationship with you is also vitally important. You are our second largest trading partner, supplying over 20% of Australia's total imports and taking over 10% of our total exports. The trade relationship is about 2 to 1 in your favour. You are our largest single source of foreign investment, and as our economy diversifies away from primary production and we strengthen our position as an exporter of manufactures and services, the business opportunities for America and Australia will expand still further. So again, the benefits are very much two-way. Mr. Speaker and Mr. President, you can therefore see why we believe our relationship entitles us to a fair go in our trade with the United States and in competition with the United States in third markets. Not, I emphasise, special favours, but a fair go.
Any thoughts on that particular clip of audio?
Yeah, competition in third markets. See, these people, I don't know what color the sky is in their world, but how you can cooperate and compete at the same time. Either you're competing or you're cooperating and sharing. And if you're cooperating and sharing, then you really don't have...
You're not really competing. Well, I could see how you could compete in certain areas and cooperate in others. Able that's what they're talking
like
about.
the Olympics. I mean, our amateur athletics can about business.
Yeah.
Business is a competition, but under this global system, they've allowed the businesses to basically break up their corporate structures into supply chains in such a way that they can shelter their income and be a huge corporation, but have it be broken up so that you don't really see it as a large corporation, but you know that it is by their income. But the whole global system is really built for business and not for countries and people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what Australia wanted, of course, they kind of understood that with the in the Asia Pacific, once they started opening up and going towards this regional system under international law, they were going to be swallowed up by China. So they wanted to partner up with the United States so that they weren't. But it happened anyway, thanks to Mitch McConnell and the open door through Hong Kong.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you covered all of the salient points you wanted to make from the article.
Well, it's what I would say is that if you're interested in the subject, read the article. Because it's kind of hard to take a slice out of history and explain it, how it is Guarantee you that it's relevant today. It's still ongoing because they are still building the special administrative regions for the global system.
Yeah, if it wasn't for regionalism, they wouldn't be able to do a lot of the stuff that they do. It's all designed to blend everything together and
right. Well,
layer.
they're building a. If you think of it like scaffolding over the top of our existing national structure, they're building scaffolding over it, and they do all of this stuff that betrays our country and betrays our people, but they're doing it in these international forums where we don't see it going on, and the media doesn't cover it.
Yeah, conveniently so, because the media is controlled. And that's the bottom line. I came across a very informative video that I thought you might be interested in, put out by an outfit called Windover Productions. The video was called How Africa is Becoming China's China. They discuss a lot about how China is using their infrastructure investment projects on the African continent for its political gain.
Political alliances manifest themselves here, on the voting floor of the United Nations General Assembly in New York, New York. In this room, countries impose legislation that carries weight worldwide, and so what happens in this room is the physical materialization of the world's politics. 47 years ago, exactly that happened when one of the General Assembly's most consequential votes occurred. China, you see, essentially has two governments. There's the Republic of China, which used to control the mainland and Taiwan, but today only administers Taiwan, and there's the People's Republic of China, which controls the mainland. Both claim to be the rightful governments of all of the Chinese territory, both Taiwan and the mainland, and so back in 1971, the United Nations had to decide which government would represent China. Essentially, the question was which government was the rightful leader of the territory, as there could only be one in the United Nations. The U.S. was the main superpower opposing the People's Republic representing China, as it had a strong political and military alliance with the Republic of China government, and so the vote was essentially the U.S.'s sphere of influence versus the world. Among the 35 countries that voted against the People's Republic were much of Africa, the Central African Republic, Chad, Gabon, Liberia, Niger, South Africa, and plenty of others that sided with the U.S. Despite the U.S.'s effort, the resolution ended up passing, and the representative government for China in the UN was switched to the People's Republic of China. But what's interesting about this vote is not the result, it's who voted against the People's Republic. Since that 1971 vote, you see, something has changed. In 2007, the UN General Assembly met once again to vote on whether to adopt a resolution condemning the human rights situation in North Korea. As one of North Korea's strongest allies, this vote was China and its sphere of influence versus the world. In this vote, though, only Burundi, Equatorial Guinea, Eritrea, Ghana, Kenya, Lesotho, Liberia, Madagascar, Malawi, Mauritania, and Tanzania voted against China. All the 43 other African countries either abstained or voted no along with China because in the 40 years between these votes, political ties changed. Africa no longer bows to the U.S. Much of the continent is now economically and politically aligned with the world's fastest emerging superpower, China. The simple answer for why this is because China has pumped huge amounts of money into the continent of Africa. They're buying allies. For example, China built a $3.2 billion railway in Kenya trekking the 300 miles from Nairobi, the capital, to Mombasa, the second largest city and primary port, in 4 hours and 30 minutes. That's faster than what the fastest train in the US, the Acela Express, takes to travel the equivalent distance from Philadelphia to Boston. China also built a $526 million dam in Guinea, which helped push the country from having constant power shortages to making more energy than it needs and selling the extra capacity to its neighbors. China also built a $475 million light rail system in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, the first of its kind in sub-Saharan Africa, designed as a way to combat the capital's crippling traffic. These are only a sampling. There are literally hundreds of others of Chinese infrastructure projects in Africa each year.
And with every project comes more influence because they're beholden to China for all of this infrastructure that's being built.
Yeah, it's a debt trap. China, especially very early on, they may be fixing that now, but China is loaning money to these very poor countries
which can't pay it
to
back.
Build infrastructure, and then when they can't pay the loans back, China takes control, ownership.
Yeah, it's the IMF model. That's exactly what the International Monetary Fund does with poor countries. It's the same thing.
And they were doing that to in our country as well. You know, that dealing with the mayors of cities and counties to build infrastructure that they couldn't afford. And I don't know how many defaults, but I know that there is a real problem in our country with bonds.
I know you gotta go, and I appreciate you being here. So I'll talk to you next week, Vicky.
Okay, bye everybody.
Hey,
Sorry, I'm cutting out early.
That's okay. I appreciate you being here at all. Hey, folks, we got one more hour of the show to go. Stay with us. I'll be back.
Before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order.
New world order.
New world order.
This is a moment to seize. The kaleidoscope has been shaken. The pieces are in flux. Soon they will settle again. Before they do, let us reorder this world around us.
A new world order.
A world where the United Nations is poised to fulfill the historic vision of its founders.
Nevertheless, the United States is in a key position to shape this so that the problem of the Bush presidency will be the emergence of a new international order.
The first decade of the 21st century, that out of what will be seen as the greatest restructuring of the global economy, a new world order was created.
Documenting the crisis of our republic.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
Waging war on the New World Order.
The councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
This is Govern America with Darren Weeks and Vicky Davis.
Live from FEMA Regions 5, well, just FEMA Region 5, this is hour number 3, the third and final hour of Govern America. It continues to be the 18th of January, 2020, as we get right back into the show here. There's so many areas that I could go down, so many areas we could explore. This is certainly the fastest 3 hours in talk radio, I can tell you, and the time goes by very quickly. But I wanted to I think what I'm going to do is continue with some of the audio that we started playing with this China thing. China is buying up Africa. China is buying influence around the world. And we started talking about that here just before the break at the top of the hour, where Windover Productions produced this video called How Africa is Becoming China's China. And I'll put the video in the show notes for people who want to see it. It's very, very instructive, very important for people to understand how this is happening and what is going on with regard to this agreement that Trump just signed with China. There is a beginning phase in all of this, and I have a feeling we're being thrown under the bus once again. Listeners, why shouldn't we believe that Trump is throwing us under the bus again? If he would throw us under the bus with regard to the NAFTA 2.0, the USMCA, why would we believe he's going to do right by us with regard to communist China? We don't need an agreement with them. The people who were in the State Department years ago with the empowering of China, with the building up of their economy at our economy's expense, why would this even happen? China wouldn't be the force to be reckoned with today had it not been for the quote-unquote diplomats at the State Department. But here we go. Here we are with this whole thing. The International Monetary Fund model is being used, loaning money to poor countries who are financially strapped And there's no way they can ever pay off these massive debts that are being incurred. And they use the terms of the loans to strip away the nation's sovereignty, which is the whole point, listeners. When you strip away a nation's sovereignty, what do you have left? World government. That's what you have. Getting back to the audio.
Of course, China isn't just financing these projects out of kindness. For each of them, there's a political goal behind it. You see, the country of China is running out of growth potential. Its era of double-digit year-over-year GDP growth is over as it makes the shift from industrializing to industrialized. Africa, meanwhile, is one of the least developed areas of the world, and a lack of development actually makes fast growth easy. The first step of economic development for many countries is natural resource exploitation. Nearly every country has some level of natural resources that can be used to kickstart growth, but first they need to have enough money to build the infrastructure and take the steps needed to gather these natural resources. As everyone knows, it takes money to make money, and China has money. By investing in African mining and farming, China can profit off Africa's growth and fuel the business back in China that requires minerals and food. But in addition to serving as a source of natural resources, Africa has another resource: labor. It might seem strange that China, the country that the world uses for low-cost manufacturing, is looking for a labor source elsewhere, but that is exactly what it's doing. China is a victim of its own success. The economic development that its manufacturing industry brought pushed a large segment of its population into the middle class, which raised labor costs countrywide. It's not bad news. China as a country has shifted from having a low-skilled to a medium-skilled workforce as their education level has improved, but for the lowest cost, lowest skilled manufacturing work, the country of China is no longer competitive. Therefore, Chinese manufacturing firms are setting up their own operations in Africa, one of the cheapest and lowest skilled labor markets in the world. Today, China is now the largest trading partner with Africa as a whole. Despite China being a vastly larger country than the US in population, the US and China both trade a similar value of goods worldwide each year. In this case, though, whereas $48 billion worth of goods were exchanged between the US and Africa in 2016, China traded $128 billion worth of goods, nearly 3 times as much. Now, the whole idea of setting up a structure of power over other less developed states in order to gather resources and use their labor force might sound familiar, because that's largely what colonialism was. The motives behind European powers expanding their territory to less developed nations in the 15th through 20th centuries were remarkably similar to the motivations between China's growing economic influence in the developing world today.
Okay, we have a call from New York. I'm going to go ahead and take the caller. Hello, caller, you're on the air.
Hey, Darren, how you doing? It's Paul in New York.
I'm doing well, Paul. How are you?
I'm good. I just wanted to call in because you're discussing China and the monetary system and how the global monetary system ties into this. Mm-hmm. And I think that one of the things that we have to take into consideration is, I mean, it's very complicated, and I would say that, you know, my expertise, well, I'm not really an expert in anything, but, you know, as far as understanding the monetary system over all of these other systems that, you know, Vicky is just, you know, an expert on, I think it's very important to point out that China, you know, they're going around buying up influence all over the world in these infrastructure projects in Africa and you know, everywhere, South America and Europe. And I think it's important to understand that China's entire banking system and their entire economy is dollarized. So they're extremely desperate. They have a dollar shortage, and they're extremely desperate for dollar supply. Mm-hmm. And you know, if you look at it from that perspective of, you know, the fact that their entire banking system. So, you know, a lot of people talk about how they own huge amounts of our treasury debt, which is true. They're the biggest holder of U.S. treasuries. But the way it works is it's very complicated. There's a guy out there that does a lot of great research on this, and he's been studying this for a really long time. His name is Jeffrey Snyder, and with a company called Alhambra Partners. And, the good thing about the monetary system is that nobody understands. Nobody understands exactly how it works.
Well, the problem is it's all based on debt. And any country that's buying into the Federal Reserve System, for instance, is buying into a debt-based system. And so you're dealing with a situation going all the way back to the Bretton Woods Agreement where it enabled the United States to export our inflation to other countries. So the surprising thing that in the 21st century we could still be considering the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency says a lot about the fact that the world doesn't seem to have any alternatives, although they're certainly trying to come up with some on their own. The U.S. has been able to throw its influence around largely because of the Bretton Woods system. But other countries seem to be getting very tired of having to listen to the United States. And so I see moves, in fact, the, special drawing rights, the SDRs, they were talking about having this basket of currencies, which would make a unit, but I know Russia and China are trying to get together and do things with regard to coming up with some kind of alternative because the world is suffering under the weight of the United States and its inflationary monetary system. What do you think of that?
Yeah, you're exactly right. It is a credit-driven monetary regime. It's debt-based. It's not really the dollar. It's complicated. It's the euro-dollar system. It's dollar-denominated, and you're exactly right that the world is sort of in the death grip of this. The pressure on this is deflationary, but there is no alternative. There's no alternative, and this is why I'm pointing out that, or not at the moment, is there any alternative? And this is a very complicated system that it works on liabilities being traded out there that span the entire planet. So the point is that China, even though what it seems like what they're doing is predatory, if you look at this from the perspective of them being desperate for dollars, having a shortage of dollars, and they need dollars, and they own a huge amount of our treasury debt, which is true, and they could go ahead and go off and sell that into the market. They want to dump our treasuries. They want to dump the dollar. That will only harm them because what they're doing is contracting their banking system, which will destroy their economy. And if they go out there, the only reason why they would start to dump our treasuries into the market, which they've done before in the past, all it did was increase the bid for U.S. debt for the same reason that they're selling, because they're only going to sell under pressure. Because if they start to reduce the asset side of their balance sheet, they have to contract the liability side, which contracts their entire banking system. Their entire monetary system is dollarized.
Yeah, well, the fascinating thing about all of this is how they are, I remember when they were building cities over there, whole cities. You remember the ghost cities that they were building?
Right.
Just to keep their slave workforce occupied. And now it seems like they've gotten a little smarter and are trying to utilize something in a more substantive way. In other words, from their standpoint, sending their, working, in other words, putting their resources into developing other countries, which would actually have a net benefit for them, being able to maintain not only the influence and the loyalty of the leaders of other countries, like the countries on the continent of Africa, for example, just being one example, but also being able to have the mineral resources as well, which does have a monetary value. See, as I see it, there's a shift going on because, really, when you talk about them being dollar heavy, with the dollar being subject to inflation and debt, to the point where, literally, people we've been talking in the Patriot realm since I've been on the air, ever since I've been involved, that eventually there's going to be a collapse of the dollar. And yet it hasn't happened, at least not like people would expect it to happen. I would argue it is happening in slow motion. I think it could very well be that the plan is not to have a fast collapse, but the plan is to continue doing exactly what they're doing, having a slow, gradual decline to the point where literally it's just worth nothing. And I mean, that seems to be what's going on. I think the transition is taking place ultimately to a digital type of currency. That's really what
I think
where they're headed for everything. Go ahead.
I think to say that these geniuses have total control over the monetary system is to give them too much credit. And you're right that this system has created bubbles all over the place, over the decades, including this massive ghost city housing bubble in China.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very complex system, and at the moment there is no alternative. And I think that, and there are problems. Since 2008, 2008, what happened then? I worked on Wall Street for 10 years, so I was working. I was right there when all this was going on, and that was a permanent dislocation. What happened in 2008 was a permanent dislocation. The entire system has not grown. It hasn't operated properly since, and and right now there's huge amounts of problems in the repo market. I don't know if I don't know if you follow this, but and these people don't know what they're doing. Like, they're injecting massive amounts of, they say, liquidity, which are basically bank reserves, into the banking system, but they're taking out all of this repo collateral out of supply, and it's a misunderstanding of how the repo market works. It's complicated. I don't want to confuse anybody that doesn't. You might need like a prerequisite in finance or something.
Yeah.
But the point is that China is desperately short dollars. They're in desperate need. Their economy can't function without dollar supply. They can't even, their goods can't even leave their ports unless they come up with the dollars first. So I understand it's they're going around the world. They're in a predatory way. It seems, and there is truth to that. But if you look at this from the perspective that China is under the grip of this Euro-dollar system,
mm-hmm.
and that that is basically their chokehold, and that a lot of this has to do with them desperately trying to get their hands on more dollar supply. And a lot of things that they're doing, they're trying to bring dollars into their economy by doing predatory things in our capital markets, in our stock and bond markets as well. I don't want to get I don't want to get too complicated. I don't want to confuse you, but they are desperately short dollars. They're in desperate need of dollars. So they might not be.
That seems to be the case across the board, doesn't it? I mean,
yes, there.
It seems like everybody is desperately short dollars.
There has been a global dollar shortage since 2008. That was that was the kicker. That since then, this is why what happened in 2008. It was very. We were flooding European central banks with dollars. They were saying we need U.S. dollars. It's this system grew and grew over the decades, and it sort of grew. It evolved sort of in its own way. Without anybody guiding it in a certain direction, it sort of evolved on its own. And this is one of the things I think is a good thing, is that from what I can see, and if you look at the work of Jeffrey Snyder, is that these geniuses, they have no clue how this works, and it's much more complicated than most people might think. And this might be the downfall of their system, that they lose control of this of this entire system.
Well, I think that's probably what nearly happened in 2008. And from my standpoint, I agree with you that they don't have 100% control. They can do what they can do. They can manipulate things, and they do have a lot of control. I think in 2008, it almost got out of hand. Although they certainly are able to take, in true Rahm Emanuel fashion, where he says never let a good crisis go to waste, they were able to take that crisis, which was engineered, but yet almost got out of hand, and use it to steal an awful lot of money from the American people. Go ahead.
I don't think that 2008 was engineered. I mean, it's it would be, I don't want to give too much credit to these controllers. I mean, I know, I was right there, and I know how this system works a little bit better than most people.
Well, and okay, here's the thing. Okay, part of the problem. Let's just take AIG. A lot of the things that they did, I don't mean the whole thing is engineered, but a lot of the things they did, which led up to the crisis, they would have had to have known is going to cause a problem. Like the protections of Glass-Steagall, and the fact that AIG was allowed to, they were insuring basically the downside. I mean, if I'm investing in something, I shouldn't be able to take out insurance against an investment if my investment goes bad. And that's part of the problem is they were allowing, AIG was involved in this, and they were allowing the people to insure against bad investments. And
I think they were. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, I guess I'm just saying that there's a lot of things that I mean, obviously this came to a head for a reason, and a lot of the things that they had going on there caused this to happen. Now, I don't think that they wanted to crash the economy at that point. Obviously, if they wanted to, they could have just sat back and let it happen, because I think it was on the threshold of having a major catastrophe. So it seems clear to me that they're willing to do whatever it takes to try to keep the thing floating along until they're ready for whatever transition to whatever is going to be replacing our present system. Does that make any sense?
Well, I think I think what happened in 2008 was a gross misunderstanding of how the whole system worked, and the fact that these money markets would always remain liquid, and that the money markets were operated in sort of this monolithic whole, and the reality of it is that they're very fragmented. And when 2008 hit, that there's proof, and there was that realization that the money market, the whole system started to fragment across geographic lines. So Europe compared to the United States, I mean, at the end of the day, what the result was that there were too many dollars in New York and not enough dollars offshore. So, I mean, this whole system, it's an offshore dollar market, and I don't think that it was engineered. I think it was just how everybody thought the system worked wasn't really how it does work. And I mean, I can tell you right now that, I see the decisions that get made by the Federal Reserve and now I guess Christine Lagarde or was Mario Draghi. They don't know what they're doing. I know it sounds crazy. They're way smarter than I am, and probably more, I don't doubt, Larry Summers and Ben Bernanke and Janet Yellen and now Jay Powell, they are way smarter than I am.
Yeah.
They're just going off of there's a misunderstanding of how this whole system works. Anyway, I just wanted to point out that when it comes to China, if you consider the perspective that they are in desperate need of dollars and that there's an enormous shortage, and that a lot of what they do and a lot of what they're doing is because they're desperate.
Yeah, I don't doubt that. And frankly, honestly, I don't blame them for doing what they're doing. It's actually the smartest thing to do, but they're building their empire. They're advancing. But the problem is my concern is that at some point there's going to be a day of reckoning, because as I see this thing going down in the future, I don't know about you, but I see this thing as being steamrolling over us, and I'm not so convinced that that's not a part of the plan, that the Western powers haven't intended for us to be steamrolled by China. Why else would everything be perfected? The surveillance technology, the social credit scoring system, like we're always talking about, all these test technologies taking place in the laboratory of China. It seems to me like the New World Order is going to be China-based. I don't know what you think about that. But
well, I don't know that may be the plan, but I wouldn't really. China is walking a very, very tight rope right now when it comes to dealing with this system, and they're the most exposed to it. We're probably the least exposed to it, but they are very exposed to this. I mean, their entire banking system, their entire economy is based off this, is dollarized. So they're in a very, very tight, bad situation when you look at it from that perspective. Mm-hmm. And whether or not this whole thing is going to fall apart, there's tremendous problems in repo. It's just that if you don't have growth, you're not going to have a rise in interest rates. Like and that's that's sort of the weird part, that if interest rates, if rates started to increase, then I think that, the United States is the most bankrupt entity to ever exist in humankind. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, we get away with this because we have over many decades a decreasing debt service ratio, and that is not going to increase unless you get some real global economic growth, which is not likely. It's not likely that I can see anytime in the future. But I don't know. I don't want to get too complicated for everybody. If anybody's interested, Jeffrey Snyder at Alhambra Partners, I think, understands this the best. He does great work on this, and he'll even admit I don't understand how this whole system works, because it's a complex system. Yeah. Definitely, it's not so simple. But I just wanted to point out that China, if you look at this from the perspective that they are desperate for dollar inflow.
Yeah, all right.
Anyway.
I appreciate it, Paul. Hey, thanks a lot for the call. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, man.
All right. You take it easy, and we'll talk again soon. There he is, Paul.
All right. Take care.
Paul in New York, ladies and gentlemen. And we're almost up to the break already. So I'll tell you what, we'll hit the ground running for the final half hour of the show when we come back. And you're welcome to call in as well, 610-600-1776 if you got anything to say. Otherwise, I'll just continue with the information, because we certainly have no shortage of information. We have no shortage of things to talk about. The biggest problem, I remember back in the day, I used to spend hours looking for information back years ago. And now you don't have to go looking for it. You have to go looking for what not to cover. You have to go looking for things, what's most important, what's the biggest priority. And it's all important, listeners, because it all ties together to form a very big, ugly picture of global governance. Stay with us. Bottom of the hour break. We'll be back. This is Govern America.
Where the spooks go to find out what's really going on. This is Govern America.
We're on the home stretch of the broadcast, final half hour here. GovernAmerica.com is the website. GovernAmerica.com. As we continue here, I want to get into the Virginia showdown that's getting ready to take place here, because I think this is a perfect example of instruction. You know, we used to have Roger Mundy all the time on the show, my good friend who's now passed on, went to the other side. But Roger Mundy used to always talk about the importance of instruction, the people coming together, deliberating amongst themselves, instructing their representatives to represent them in Washington, D.C. And that's really what needs to happen. And that shows you what can happen. That's not to say that every time people do that, they're necessarily going to have a victory. But if they don't try, they won't have victories. They'll be doomed to defeat. And this is why I think we have to guard against getting into a kind of a doom and gloom scenario, which is really easy to do in this day and age. As we look around us and see all the bad that's happening, we have to keep in mind that there is also good that's happening as well. This push to remove the guns, folks, this should have been done by their standards, by their opinions, by they being the controllers, the global planners, the people who are pushing world government, the people, the Rothschilds and the Henry Kissingers and, the Madeleine Albrights and the Bill Clintons and, all of them. I'm just naming names because all of them are a part of it. All of them are a part of pushing the plan for totalitarian control, listeners. And I'm defining names, I'm naming names only because certain people want you to define who they are. But there are people in the shadows as well as face people on TV and in the think tanks and in the talking heads. But this plan for world government can't take place without removing people of their firearms. Because disarmament is very important. It's very important to the United Nations. It's very important because you can't have peace by their standards if the people can fight back. And the guns are your liberty teeth. The situation that's unfolding right now in Virginia, I think, is something to be watched, but it's not just Virginia. It's coming to an apex. It's coming to a zenith. It's coming to a peak. The legislature there, considering a package of bills to infringe upon the people's right to keep and bear arms, as a result, over 100 cities and counties, I think it's like 105 or something like that now, have adopted Second Amendment sanctuary ordinances or resolutions. There was a protest scheduled at the Capitol where a lot of pro-Second Amendment groups, they were going to attend. The governor put out an executive order declaring that guns were not allowed on the Capitol grounds. A court upheld that order. The Democrats there are claiming that there have been threats of violence. They're saying that armed militias are going to storm the Capitol. And I think that that's a lot of hogwash, a lot of garbage, but I do want to put in this caveat, and I think Vicky kind of touched upon it earlier when she was here, it is a very worrying situation in the sense that when you have that many people together, if they're responsible people, then it's fine to have a lot of armed people together. There's no problem. The problem is when you got agents provocateur who would infiltrate the crowd and do certain things to try to start problems, to try to make the entire crowd, everybody there, look bad. And that's the thing that I'm concerned about. You can have a show of force per se by having large numbers of people there. As a matter of fact, they've already changed, as I mentioned earlier, they've already changed the bills, weakened them a little bit because of the initial response. I guess they just had a big protest. What was it, last week? I think it was last Monday, if I'm not mistaken. And then they're planning on having another one this Monday. So the people involved in this protest need to be careful, because this is the kind of protest event that can easily lend itself to infiltration from the other side. Everyone has to be on guard for COINTELPRO type operators that would attempt to start violent acts. Because, again, anything that happens can be a powder keg. Anyway, here's an update from Virginia.
Off the top at 10 tonight, tensions are on the rise in Virginia over the state's changing stance regarding Second Amendment laws. A judge upheld the governor's temporary ban put in place ahead of an anti-gun reform rally in Richmond. Governor Ralph Northam said the restrictions follow credible threats of armed confrontations and planned assaults on the state capitol.
And there have already been arrests made ahead of the gathering on Monday. The FBI says this Canadian, along with 2 others from Maryland, are members of a neo-Nazi group who may have planned to disrupt the rally. The feds accuse Patrick Matthews of illegally entering the U.S. The other 2 Maryland men are suspected of transporting firearms and helping to give him a place to stay. The FBI says the men had more than 1,600 rounds of ammunition with them.
One delegate from Manassas said he's received death threats from several pro-gun demonstrators. Democratic Socialist Lee Carter will spend Monday in a safe house instead of at the State House. Carter says he's received hundreds of violent threats aimed at him and his family. Well, as the gun debate continues in Virginia, gun store owners in the state say business is booming. Josh Rosenthal is here now to explain why. Josh?
Yeah, put simply, guys, there are a lot of people in Virginia right now who, right or wrong, fear that their Second Amendment rights are about to be taken away.
Business has been absolutely crazy.
About a 200% to 300% increase since the last election, Jerry Rapp told us. But that doesn't mean it's all good news for the Alexandria gun shop owner and his customers.
People are really on edge. They're worried about their Second Amendment rights. They're worried about the future of what you can and cannot have as a firearm.
The concern stems from last November, when Virginia Democrats took over both the executive and legislative branches of government for the first time in decades. Now, with efforts to pass new gun laws already underway, people like Jake Robertson are flooding into stores like this.
If they're willing to make laws that are strip your Second Amendment right, then, I mean, who's to say what could happen? So, yeah, I'm going to get it while I can.
FBI statistics show Robertson is far from alone. In December of 2018, for instance, there were about 53,000 firearm background checks run in Virginia. But this past December, the number ballooned to nearly 77,000, an increase of about 45%.
Profitability-wise, it's been great, but at some point that's going to stop. And stop means that either that everything has gone back to kind of the same as where we were, or that it's going to be stopped and my business could be affected completely, where I could be out of business.
Some of the laws that have been proposed in Virginia would limit handgun purchases to 1 per month, require universal background checks, institute red flag laws, and local governments would also be allowed to ban guns at certain events. Now, it should be said there is strong support, guys, for those bills among gun control advocates.
Wow, so where do you think things are going to go next here? I mean, I know we've got this big rally that's coming up on Monday. What are we talking about?
It's a really good question. I think the thing to watch is what happens during this legislative session that just started in Virginia. All of this legislation is going to be debated. You have to think that at least some of it is going to pass, but who knows what at this point.
Okay, I want to share with you from Red State Watcher. This is actually a piece from the Virginia State Senator, one of the Virginia State Senators. And she says, I want you to be aware of how we're being set up. She posted a message on Facebook. And she says, sadly, I am posting this knowing that the governor of Virginia has declared a state of emergency in our state. I want you to know how we're being set up. Does the Patriot Act ring a bell? Does the National Defense Authorization Act ring a bell? If people show up wearing any kind of uniform, patch, or other symbol on their clothing signifying they belong to a militia, and something goes wrong, you could and will be held as a domestic terrorist. She says if anyone steps out of line, all it takes is one person. It may even be a government plant. If the plant does anything to disrupt the rally, you could/will be arrested as a domestic terrorist. The governor using the media already has set the stage for this to happen. He has already laid the groundwork to make the entire movement look like insurrection. It will be used to put the rest of the nation on notice of what will happen to you if you resist. They have used the Southern Poverty Law Center over the last 15 years to lay the groundwork. They have labeled us as potential domestic terrorists for a long time now. Anyone who is ever related to the 3 Percenters, a militia, or just belong to any patriot group, the groundwork has been laid to brand you as a domestic terrorist. They've gone out of their way since the Obama years to ensure they had us labeled, but it didn't start with Obama. It started with the Patriot Act under the Bush administration. Once again, folks, proving once again as what I always say, destroying America is a bipartisan effort. Anyway, continuing. She says, we are being played by a well-oiled machine. These things have been in the works for many years. They're kicking things into high gear. Military veterans were and are even listed as potential domestic terrorists. We were not told once, or we were told not once, but several times by the current president, it's not me they're after, it's you, the American people. Yeah, and then he said he was in the way. Well, I don't think he's in the way at all, listeners. I really don't. Any president that will re-up the Patriot Act is not in the way. He's a part of the problem. Anyway, I digress. Their actions over the last 3 years have shown you he was right, that they are after you. They are coming for us, full speed ahead, and they aren't even trying to hide it anymore. She says, keep your head on a swivel and know what's going on around you at all times at Lobby Day, and that's the day that January 20th, this Monday, the day of the rally. Everyone be safe out there, and thus always to tyrants. So that is Senator Amanda Chase weighing in on how she thinks people could potentially be being set up. And that's true. Under the Obama administration, keep in mind, listeners, that the 2012, the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA, 2012, declared the United States a battlefield. And under that law, indefinite detention without due process could be had. This is not America, folks. They are destroying our country one piece at a time. But this is something to be concerned about and something that everyone needs to be aware of as you attend the rally. And I'm not saying don't go to the rally. I think you should go to the rally. But I think you do have to watch out for these provocateurs, because that, unfortunately, is a very real thing today. We've seen a number of times in situations. But it's encouraging to see people standing up for the Second Amendment rights. Davidson County commissioners, and it's not just in Virginia that this is going on. The movement's spreading to other states. We've been saying for years that the county sheriff is the key to thwarting federal tyranny. As the chief law enforcement official in each county, he has the power to tell the feds to get out of the county. He also has the power to thwart unconstitutional laws. When a sheriff knows his rightful role, liberty can thrive in his county. And in Davidson County, North Carolina, where they were having another one of these sanctuary cities for the Second Amendment, they have a sheriff there that knows what he's supposed to do constitutionally. He takes his oath of office very seriously. And that's what every sheriff should sound like, is what he said. He stood up at the, this is Davidson County, North Carolina Sheriff Trip Castor is his name. He's in front of the County Board of Supervisors, and he's speaking in favor of making the county a Second Amendment sanctuary. I want you to listen to this guy and ask yourself the question, would your sheriff take such a good, strong stand in favor of the Constitution and in favor of your rights?
My name's Trip Castor. As you can see, I'm here. I just want to personally...
Could you pull that mic up a little bit?
Is that better? Okay. I just want to personally and publicly go on record supporting this resolution before us this evening. You know, guys, it's simple, like a lot of them have said. The Constitution needs no explanation. It's been enforced for several hundred years now. It's easy to understand. It says what it means and means what it says. And the last time I read the Declaration of Independence, it specifically reminds all of us that we're endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, which means God-given. Among these, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, and that governments were instituted among men specifically to secure our God-given rights. And it says when government becomes destructive to these ends, meaning when they go above and beyond trying to secure our liberties and trying to take them, it's the right of the people to alter or abolish that government, either by voting or ultimately, God forbid, to use our Second Amendment rights to protect ourselves from tyranny. And I'm just asking all of y'all to unanimously join our sister counties of Wilkes, Surrey, Stokes, Lincoln, and Cherokee and get on board with this thing and publicly demonstrate to us that you're willing to uphold and honor the same oath I took when I put my hand on God's word and held my other hand up to him and swore that I'd give my life to defend that Constitution. And I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but regardless of what y'all do or don't do, I'm not going to enforce an unconstitutional law. I'm going to protect the people of this county regardless of what's done here. So I'm just praying. I've been praying about this thing all week, that God would touch y'all's heart and say, hey, let's get on board. Let's do the right thing. Let's let these people know that we're here to support them, and we're not going to allocate any personnel, finances, resources, or facilities to infringe on their liberties. Thank you.
Now that is the sound of freedom, ladies and gentlemen. That is the sound of freedom. And that sheriff needs to be backed by all the people there. But that's what can happen when people come together and instruct. And, by the way, that whole resolution was adopted unanimously there. And so, I guess that's the encouraging thing to me, is when I see people standing up for liberty. You know, it was very discouraging when you pretty much, if you had no opposition whatsoever. And for a long time, it seemed like everybody was just involved in their lives. Nobody's taking a stand. But that's not the case now. And this thing is spreading. And I think really, honestly, I think the other side may very well have overplayed their hand with all these public shootings everywhere, which seems to be a normal part of our life now. They're not going away anytime soon. All the more reason why you have to arm everyone. You have to allow everyone to have guns. Because even if you were able to outlaw guns, there's still other ways of attacking. But you're not going to get rid of the guns anyway. If you outlaw them, people can make them from raw material, folks. If somebody is really, it's already illegal to have a bomb, yet there's bombs that go off. People make bombs in their basement because they can get raw materials. So is banning something going to work? No, it's not going to work. It's ridiculous. But the solution is to have people be able to defend themselves. Just like in that church at White Settlement, the White Settlement Church, where that one shooter came into the church, he was put down in seconds because there were plenty of people there who were good people who had firearms who were able to stop him before the situation. He got off. He shot a couple of people, which was tragic in itself, but it could have been a whole lot more tragic. So, and I know I'm largely preaching to the choir on this issue, but it's very important. And here we see from Sons of Liberty, I don't know why they always have to do these stupid pop-ups. Every time, seems like every website you go to now, you got pop-ups to deal with. Virginia, by the way, our website, we don't do pop-ups, and we never will. So there you go. I don't assault my viewers. If somebody visits the website, you're my guest. I'm not going to punch you in the nose with some pop-up. So I challenge other webmasters, knock it off. Quit doing that. If you want to make money, you want somebody to sign up for your newsletter, assaulting them with a pop-up is not a way to do it. Sorry. It's aggressive and it's obnoxious. Anyway. From sonsoflibertymedia.com, huge pro-gun crowd shows up to protest legislature pulls gun confiscation bill. They said Democratic gun grabbers are all talk until people who actually support the right to keep and bear arms stand up for their rights. Even as Virginia Governor Ralph Northam engages in propaganda against the citizens of Virginia in declaring a state of emergency because armed militia groups plan to storm the Capitol, which is pure nonsense. The fact is that those pawns in the legislature backed down from their tyrannical gun confiscation legislation when hundreds, if not thousands, of Virginians showed up in protest. Now, that doesn't mean they're tabling all of it, but the fact is they weakened it to a certain extent. They're hoping by doing so people will be relieved enough and give up on the protest. That's what they're doing. But see, here's the thing, folks. That shows that you are making a difference. You are having an effect. And that's all the more reason to keep their nose to the grindstone and their feet to the fire. He received from the Washington Times, Virginia Democrats' push for new gun controls is having a major ripple effect hundreds of miles south in Florida, where at least 10 counties, fearing their state could be next, have declared themselves Second Amendment sanctuaries. With residents backing, county commissioners have passed resolutions saying they will resist efforts by higher-ups to force gun registration or even confiscation of firearms already in citizens' hands. On Saturday, gun rights activists plan to rally at government offices in Santa Rosa County, which lies in the Panhandle section of the state, with its dense population of military and veterans, hoping to send a message of support to local commissioners and a warning to the Florida legislature not to follow Virginia's path. And there you have it. This is called instruction, listeners. I should put Roger Mundy's video in the show notes. He's talked a lot about that, and this is exactly what it takes. Let me see what else I've got here in the waning moments of the broadcast. We only have a few minutes left. It's amazing how fast things go. I see that the conservation stuff with Agenda 21 is moving forward. Australia's planning on classifying more species as, basically instituting conservation with new umbrella species. And what are we talking about? Broadening definitions to cover more species. This comes from SciTech Daily. The protection of Australia's threatened species could be improved by a factor of 7 if more efficient, quote-unquote, umbrella species were prioritized for protection, according to the University of Queensland research. Umbrella species are species which, when preserved, indirectly protect many other plant and animal species. University of Queensland PhD candidate Michelle Ward and different choices in Australia could provide more assistance for threatened species. The Australian federal government's umbrella prioritization lists 73 species as conservation priorities, but this only ends up benefiting 6% of Australia's threatened territorial species. This figure could be increased to benefit, they say, nearly half of all threatened territorial species for the same budget. What is this all about? Listeners, it's about controlling people. Ultimately, that's what it's about. It's not about conservation. They don't care about conservation. Not really. There are major environmental problems that could be dealt with, listeners, if we weren't always talking about climate change, for instance, a bogus, nonsensical issue. If they really cared about the environment, they cared about protecting species, why would they be focusing on all the resources on that? It's about people control. It's about controlling where you live. The more species that are, quote-unquote, protected, even if they don't need to be, then the more they have the ability to dictate where you live, how you live, and that's the problem. Agenda 21, look it up, because we're living it today more than ever. We're living Agenda 21. And just because Agenda 2030 came along doesn't mean Agenda 21 isn't still being implemented. It's all the same thing. And I don't see any other reason to think otherwise. There's a lot more to talk about. I had Saudi Arabia stuff to get to. We won't get to that this week. Maybe we'll do it next week. And, of course, there's always plenty of China stuff. But I hope you folks will, those of you going to the rallies in Virginia, just keep your eyes open. Keep your eyes open And the rest of you, I encourage you to pray for this republic. Do what you can to restore it. God bless each and every one of you. We'll be back next week. Vicky will be here, and we'll continue. We'll be loaded for bear, as they say. And in the meantime, try to avoid all the snowfall. I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do today, but we'll probably wade out in it at some point. Anyway, God bless you, folks. Appreciate you joining us every week. I really do. I really view this audience as somewhat of an extended family of mine. And we're all in this thing together, to quote Red Green. Anyway, God bless you, folks. We'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.